saw the question on Facebook. Someone is working with one of our built-in applique fonts. And with our applique fonts, you're going to notice each letter. In fact, I just see one color stop here. So this entire thing is one color stop. And when we play it through, what we see is that it's going to do the letters in the order we brought them in. So it's going to do the stitch, and then we would have a stop command. So we would lay down the fabric. Then it would do the tack down stitch, and we would trim away the fabric. Then it would finish it with the satin stitch, and you'd go through that for all the letters. But the question was, what if I wanted to do all the placement stitches, then all the tack down stitches, and then the final stitching? So we could do that by going into the Modify tab here and figuring out or finding those stop commands and inserting different color stops. But the easier way to do this is going to be to work in the Create module, and you'll see why when I get over there. I'm going to go back to the letter tab. I want to make sure I'm using Athletic, Outline Patch, Uppercase, 35 to 70. So let me pop over to Create now. And here on the Home tab of Create, I have a button, Insert Lettering, that will let me bring in any of the lettering that's built into our software. I believe it was Athletic Outline Patch, UC, which means uppercase, 35 to 70 millimeters. I'm going to select that, and the next thing I would do is tell it how large I want the letters to be. I'm going to bring them in for this example at 2 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and type 50 millimeters, and I'll bring in my letters. So I'm going to select the letter T and click Insert. And notice it just adds it here in the lower left-hand corner of my hoop. Then I'll do that for the remaining 3 letters. And then let's click Cancel, and let's talk about what we're seeing now on our film strip and in our work area. Each of those letters has come in as a separate group, which is very handy because I could select them and I could move them around, or I could, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit undo a couple of times. The easier way to do this, I'm going to do a Select All Visible to select all 4 of them. Then I'll move that into the middle of the hoop. Now, before I do anything else, I do want to look at a couple of things. So I'm going to just right-click on this first letter, the letter T in my film strip, and go to my properties and look at what we're seeing. So first of all, it's telling me that I do not have any fill on this. Because it's an applique, that makes sense. It's using a satin line. I am seeing that the width of this is 2.5 millimeters, and I would say that for an applique, I would want at least a width of about 4 millimeters. And the larger that gets, I might take that up to even a 5 or 6 millimeters, depending on how big the letter is. Then notice on the Applique tab, it's using the standard applique method, which means every one of these objects that is a satin line applique has a placement stitch, then it has a stop command in it, then it has a tack down stitch, then a stop command, and then the final satin outline. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now notice I changed the width of the letter T, but not of the other ones because I had just done the properties on the first one. So I could, if I right-clicked on that and went into Global Properties, even though it's already there, when I type 4, is going to change the properties of all 4 of the letters. Now at this point, before I ungroup them, if I want to select them and maybe space them apart just a little bit more, I could certainly do that. I could eyeball it. So just get your letters kind of how you like them. I think that looks good probably. And I was moving them a little left and right using the arrow keys on my keyboard. Now notice that each one of them is in a group, and I want my film strip to be as simple as it possibly can be before I go to my next step. So I'm going to do a Select All Visible. I'm going to click the bottom half of the group and choose Ungroup. So now on my film strip, what I'm seeing is a color change in the first letter, a color change in the second letter, and so on. The first thing I'm going to do is get rid of my extra color changes. So I'm going to select the first one. I'm going to hold down the Control key on the keyboard because when I hold down the Control key, it's going to let me select objects that aren't next to each other in the film strip. And once I have all of those selected, I'm going to click Delete. Now remembering that each one of these 4 letters has all the commands for the placement and the tack down and the stop commands, I want to be able, because we're going to add some color changes manually, rather than doing them one at a time, the first thing I'm going to do is select all of the letters. And I did that. I had the first one selected. I held down the Shift key. And when you have something on the film strip selected and click on the Shift key, it's going to select everything between your first click and your second click. And then I'm going to go over to the Edit tab, and I'm going to use a function called Break Apart. Now those are no longer single objects, so I have for every letter a placement stitch, or I got a running stitch that's my placement stitch, an applique piece that shows me where the fabric would go and what it would look like, a double stitch, which is my tack down, and then stop commands between each of those things. Now I'm going to get rid of all the stop commands first of all because I'm going to add color changes between every step. And the easiest way to do that, I'm going to click on the stop command, and I could select each one of them and click delete, but I'm going to right click and choose select similar from visible. And that is going to select every stop command in my design that is currently visible. Then I'm going to click delete. So now this is a lot like an applique, but I don't have stop commands anymore. So if we watched this stitch out, I would see all the placements, tack down, everything we would expect in an applique, but it's not going to stop between the letters. So what we need to do now is add color changes where we need them in our design. So thinking about it logically, I'm going to do this. I'm going to change the color so it ends up in green. So I'm going to double click on my first color and I'm going to just click on a blue color swatch because I want all of my placement stitches to end up being blue. So now the first thing that happens at my machine is I get the blue for the placement stitch. It does my running stitch. I'm going to go over to any of my Create tools, and then I'm going to click the bottom half, and I'm going to choose a color for my tack down stitch. I'm going to go ahead and use red. So now what I'm seeing, I see everything here turns red because everything in my FilmStrip comes after that red color command. But what I really have, if I think about where I'm going, is now I have a blue stitch for my placement and my placement stitch, a red color change, that applique piece of fabric, my tack down stitch. Now I'm going to add another color change for my green. And then I'm going to just repeat that for each of the other letters. So notice I'm selecting the last of my green objects because my color change is always, or the last of my letter T objects, because when I insert my color change, it's always going to go in the FilmStrip sequentially right after the object I have selected. So when I add a color change here to blue for that tack down placement color, then it comes in. So now my placement stitch is going to be blue. Then I'm going to do a red. Then I'm going to grab my double stitch and do a green. And I'm just going to repeat that process over and over again. And if I do it correctly, what I will see is that my letters all end up being the right colors. So I'm going to do the blue. Then I'm going to change to my red for my tack down color. Notice my applique piece and my double stitch are after the red. And then I'm going to do a green. And then I'm going to scroll on down the list, put my cursor or put my selection in front of my last letter, do a blue. Then I'm going to do my red. Then I'm going to do my final green. And the FilmStrip is really nice for being able to do things like this because sequentially we call it a FilmStrip because it's almost like I have a camera that's taken a picture at every step of every object that I create. So I can see sequentially exactly what's going to happen. So now here's where it gets really cool because when I go to my design player, notice I only have 3 colors listed. Now that is because in my color list I have 12 colors, but if we remember, and I know we've talked about this before, when we look at the design player or the live view, or when we export or send a design, it's always going into configure and it's going to the export tab to look at what my default settings are. So my default settings here are to combine and color sort. So what it is doing in this design is it sees there are a bunch of different blues it could put together, there are a bunch of different reds it could put together, and there are a bunch of greens that it will put together. So now my design player, when I watch it stitch out, is going to do all of my placement stitches, then it's going to do all of my tack down stitches, and then all of my satin stitches. And I'm ready to then export that design and use it, or you can even just do, if you'd rather, click the bottom half of the copy button, do a copy embroidery, and then you could paste it back over in Premiere Plus to embroidery and work with it as a design. I would save this probably as an EDO file since I'm working in Create, because that would let me come back here later if I decided I wanted to space these letters out a little bit or change the width, because I still have all of those properties that I can change because I'm working with the FilmStrip. So it's an interesting technique, and what I like about this, and I hope you will practice it, is it really gets you used to kind of manipulating objects on the FilmStrip. And as you start creating your own designs, or even if you're just working with maybe super designs or lettering in Create, it'll get you more comfortable with working with the FilmStrip and understanding how to change the sequence and add things to control what you want to create in your design. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.